Well, hello there. It's Paul Haney again. And my friend Ev and I had such a good time with our gratitude video that we thought we would make another one here today on another topic that is interesting to both of us, and that is setting healthy boundaries. And I want to formally introduce my good friend Ev Natacha. She is a singer songwriter. She's also a certified life coach, and she's also a fitness and health advocate, and she's also uh, a clothing entrepreneur. And stop me if I go too far here, Em. And you also are starting a new podcast called Sober, Fit, and Fabulous. And she's all those things and so much more. Ev, good to have you back, my friend.
Thank you so much, Paul. I don't know what to say, but thank you. That's a I've been called a few things in my lifetime, and it's nice to be called those things
Before we
today.
before we get started, I just want to let people know that you have launched a podcast called Sober, Fit, and Fabulous. You want to just tell us just a quick little bit about that?
Sure, thank you. So basically, I just literally a few weeks ago, I had this thought where, there are some things I have on my heart that I'd like to share, and some really inspiring, motivating individuals I've had the opportunity to connect with, where I would love to start a platform, have a safe space for folks to share and to connect and to converse, kind of like what we're doing this afternoon, about topics all around being sober, staying fit, and of course, being fabulous.
Of course.
Naturally. So yeah, it's the whole premise for me is creating a fun, safe space where we keep it really light and focus on positive things and not necessarily go into our past and trauma and that. I mean, there's a place for that, but I'm wanting to keep it really solution focused and goal oriented, and looking to the future and coming up with ideas on how to become the best versions of ourselves that we can be.
All right, that sounds good. All right, well, I'm just going to kind of turn it over to you right now, Ev, because our topic today is setting healthy boundaries. And I do have a few thoughts on that subject, but I would like you to kind of lead the discussion here today, if you don't mind. So get us started, if you would. Setting healthy boundaries, what is that all about?
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. Well, so about a few years ago, I remember I was back in school becoming a life coach, and the topic of the day was boundaries. And I remember my instructor wrote boundaries on the blackboard, and we had to brainstorm about what words came up with thoughts and emotions around boundaries. And I remember feeling so confused because I was like, boundary, what's a boundary? Is that something with traffic? There's a boundary, you can't drive in here or whatever, which, is a great metaphor in life. And what I learned from that experience was that A, I didn't really have healthy boundaries. B, I didn't recognize boundaries when they were necessary to be set. And also, I didn't honor them. And the result was that I was in a state of constantly feeling like I was living for other people. I wasn't true to myself, and I wasn't living a genuine life that I felt was my own. So, the practice of setting and honoring boundaries is huge. It's been huge in my recovery as well as in my personal and professional relationships. And the thing that I noticed, and I'm really excited to hear what your take is on this, was that when I started setting these healthy boundaries, um, it brought out the emotional immaturity in certain individuals. And it was because I was changing the rules. I was messing with the system. And foolishly, I truly did think that once I started setting my boundaries, everyone around me, the world would just be going with the flow and the current of the new rules, and it would be this seamless, new way of working, right? Which I learned very fast was not going to happen. And that's not to say that once we set boundaries, people aren't going to be on board forever, but it took a little bit of time, and it took me um, staying true to myself and not wavering on those boundaries. So, yeah. What are your thoughts around that? Like, did you find that when you came into recovery or, you know, becoming the version of yourself that I see today, that um, that other people maybe didn't like it or had issues around that? And how did you respond to that?
Yeah, as a recovering alcoholic, I see this a lot, especially with newcomers. They have, my experience is a lot like yours, Ev. I just had no idea what a boundary was, or how to set them, or that I needed to set them. I I had no idea because, I mean, I love my parents and they did a good job of raising three boys, but a lot of times, they didn't discuss things like setting boundaries or stuff like that. It just wasn't discussed. It was a factor of the times. I was raised in the 1970s, and we just didn't talk about that kind of stuff. And I'm finding it so valuable now that I'm in recovery, that I have to I had to basically learn from scratch how to set those boundaries. And it sounds like you kind of had that same experience. So yeah, I the big thing for me that I had to overcome was the people pleasing. I was a natural born people pleaser. I wanted everybody to like me, and I would do anything I could, to get people to like me. And I didn't realize that if I was just myself, that people would like me just for that. That didn't never occurred to me. And I'm finding that out as I've gotten older. And it's something I'm still learning about. And part of that is setting boundaries. And some of those boundaries you have to set with yourself. I have to just not step in every time I think I need to step in. Sometimes I just need to back off and let people make their own mistakes, and, just kind of not be that people pleaser all the time. And, again, it's a work in progress. I'm not I may never get it completely, but I think I'm a lot better than I used to be at that sort of thing. And like you said, the other thing you said too was the follow through. Once you set that boundary, you got to stick to it. Because people will try to manipulate you, you know, and that is really something that is a tough thing for us former addicts or alcoholics to deal with, because we didn't deal with it when we were in our active addiction. So it's a learning curve, I think. And it doesn't only apply to alcoholics or addicts. I think it can apply to anybody. And that's, the kind of bringing it back to our gratitude discussion. Anybody can practice this and live a healthier life because of it. But yeah, it's been a huge learning curve for me.
Right. Yeah. And what I'm hearing, thank you, Paul, is that, most of us don't realize how essential healthy boundaries are for our health, our happiness, our well being, our relationships, confidence, and our overall well being in life. At least that was my experience when I began practicing and honoring them. I started to, even the way that I speak, with more direct communication and being assertive. The Ev, I guess 5, 6 years ago, um, when I think of that version of myself, I have this vision of a little mouse that was like scared. And truly, I even spoke that way with a more, quiet tone, and hard to believe, right? Right. But um, but but I realize, just like you were saying, just being myself and coming to realize that I'm enough as I am. I don't need to create some kind of um, interpretation of myself that I think other people want me to be, is it was never authentic anyway, right? So I think that's a huge piece. It really is. And also, what I was hearing when you were sharing was, and I can so relate to this, being an empathetic person, right? Lacking healthy boundaries creates problems because I've been a self-proclaimed yes girl, right? Yeah, sure, yeah, really, when I really didn't feel comfortable doing something or allowing something to happen. And I just love this quote that no is a complete sentence. That's it. No justification needed, you know? And that was a big one for me as well, because once I learned to say no, I felt like, no, I can't, no, I won't go here because the blah, 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 and da, 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 and da, 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 and trying to justify, no, it just, no, right? As simple as that.
Yeah, it's okay to say no once in a while, you know?
Absolutely. It's so simple, right? But it took me a while for that to get drilled into my thick skull over here.
Well, like I said, it's a practice, you know, it's something that I have to constantly remind myself of. And another thing too about setting boundaries is, especially in the beginning, yeah, you do want to follow through and stick to them. But you know what? Boundaries can change because people change. You know, if you have a particularly toxic person in your life, it's okay to cut them out, but maybe, you know, maybe they're going through an addiction or maybe they're going through just a hard time in life and they can change. And if somebody changes and shows me they've changed and I can trust them again, then yeah, I can maybe revisit that boundary.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. I'm gonna chew on that for a while because you're right. And I have had that experience where, an individual has resurfaced into my life and now the rules have changed. And as long as there's a mutual respect around that, perhaps things can be mended, right? And we are all on our own journeys. Um, Something I've noticed as well that I thought I'd like to bring up has been how I'm curious about your experience and how people have tried to perhaps coerce or pull you back into the system once those boundaries are set. Because in my experience, I'll just share quickly, is I've noticed there's been criticism, the attempt to criticize me by saying something like, "Oh, well, that's just ridiculous. Oh, Ev, well, what's wrong with you?" Right? Or "You're so selfish." When literally, maybe I am putting myself first and I haven't before. And that's not me being selfish. That's me being true to myself, right? And then there's been things like guilt where I've heard, "I've never done that to you," or "After all I've done for you," or "After all I do, like, you're not going to do this," and trying to guilt me into something. And then the last one, the one that I thought about was the whole ridicule thing, right? And literally, I got to share this. When I started this boundary thing, and I won't name names, but there was a person in my life where I set a boundary and then I was honoring that boundary. And then I literally heard this individual say to me, "There goes Ev setting her boundaries again." And it was a moment of such obvious ridicule, which now in hindsight, I look back and I'm grateful for because it really showed me who that person was and that I had outgrown the relationship. Um, so there's a lot of learning and a lot of growth out of practicing these new skills and opening up a whole world of opportunity to, this sounds maybe a little bit negative, but cut people out and realize, just kind of get rid of the junk in my life, people, places, and things, and allow space for healthy positive, like-minded individuals and experiences to come into my world.
Yeah, the first thing I thought of when you mentioned that is, boy, if somebody noticed you're setting a boundary, you're probably doing it right. I know they were being a smart ass, but
Yeah.
you're probably doing it right if people notice. So, but yeah, getting back to that whole selfish thing is like, selfish. It's such a loaded word because self care is not being selfish. Taking care of your mind, body, and spirit, that's something you need to do in order to live a balanced life. And I'm never going to apologize to anybody for being selfish, because the last 11 years in my recovery here have been the best years of my adult life. And I just am surrounded by new friends that love me for who I am. And I don't have to be that people pleaser anymore. And that is very, very satisfying. And I think I hear the same thing from you.
Hmm. Yeah, that's perfect segue, because I was going to ask you a question, but you kind of just answered it. I was going to ask, how did it feel, or how does it feel when you consciously are setting a boundary and you're honoring it?
It feels good. It feels empowering. It
Yes.
and I can imagine, it might be a little bit different for men and women, but I think we're all human at the end of the day. And, we all have feelings. And, being raised, as again, a child of that generation, I was always taught boys don't show their feelings. Boys aren't allowed to cry. They're weak. That's a sign of weakness. And boy, that really messes with your head when you're told that a message like that, and I'm sure girls have that have similar things that they're raised with, that yeah, but it's just so empowering when you can realize that, hey, it's your life. You're the one who's in charge. You need to make the rules. And if people aren't going to follow those rules, too bad. You don't need them in your life then, if that's the case. That's what.
Oh, Paul, I just got God bumps all over. I love that. Thank you for saying that. It's so true. It feels empowering. I like that word around that. Yeah.
All right. So, do we have any other thoughts? I think this is a pretty good discussion. It wasn't that long, but I think we hit all the main points. Is there anything else you want to say about boundaries or?
I would just encourage anybody who is listening, who is watching this right now, to try try it, even practice it. And I remember when I first started with this whole boundary and direct communication thing, there was a lot of fear because it was something new. And with anything new and change can be challenging. I was literally shaking and I was afraid and I was prophesizing or catastrophizing what's going to happen. But the reality is, on the other side of it, um, I kind of want to say, once I started with this boundary thing, I'm not going back, because I've gained a sense of self-respect, and confidence and self-worth around that. So it's really powerful stuff, especially for those of us in recovery. It's a gift that we give ourselves by honoring boundaries.
Well, that's a good way to end this. I think that's beautiful. Thank you, Ev, for joining me today and talking about boundaries. And we'll have to think of another topic for next time, but I think we did a good job with this one. So thank you so much, Ev. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, Paul.